I'm Sam Queck, and this is the Telegraph Women's Sport Podcast, proudly sponsored by MasterCard, championing heroes and history makers for over 25 years.
Women's football, Euro final, England versus Germany, Wembley, sold out stadium, and then to go on and win it. It was just insane.
A lot of the chatter afterwards was, I really hope it's not the ACL, hope it's everything else.
I'd worked in the Olympic and Paralympic system for a number of years. No one had ever said the word periods, no one had talked about menstrual cycles.
I've totally subscribed to best person for the job, but often the best person for the job could well be a female, but society isn't ready for that yet.
All I'm saying is that everybody should know how to swim. I can't fathom how you can try and say that that is troublemaking or anything like that.
Every time I hear somebody talk about investing in women's sport and talking about it as if it's some sort of donation or like charity.
You're welcome.
It's just such a weird way to tell me that you're bad at business.
I'm Sam Queck, and welcome to the Telegraph Women's Sport Podcast. With women's sport enjoying a higher profile than ever before, we want to shine a light on important topics in this space, and I'll be joined by people from various spheres to discuss them. In this episode, we're talking about coaching. We all recognise the importance of good, quality coaching in sport, whether in guiding youngsters at the start of their sporting journeys or helping elite athletes as they challenge for trophies and medals. I know all too well the impact of both. I'm joined by three people to discuss all facets of coaching. First up, we have a talented fly half in her playing days. Giselle Mather was part of England's Rugby World Cup winning squad in 1994. She enjoyed plenty of success in coaching too, both in women's and men's rugby, and was the first woman to earn the RFU's Level 4 coaching badge, as she's been involved at London Irish, Wasps, and now Ealing Trailfinders. Hello, Giselle.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Coming on. For now, you are at Ealing Trailfinders. It's in its infancy. Tell us why you were recruited there and what your role is, please, because it all sounds very exciting.
It is. It's a brand new challenge for me as well, because it's a completely new team that's going into the Premier 15s, which is the top domestic league in the women's game. So I have had they recruited me last September, and sort of 3 stages I put it into as I sat down and looked at the challenge. Stage 1 went from September to December, where I had to put the bid together to convince the RFU that Ealing Trailfinders was a team they wanted in the Premier 15s. And that's looking at all the minimum operating standards and how you're going to build it, the resources you've got, the amount of staff you're going to have, just the whole environment that you're going to set up. So we had to bid for that in December, and we were granted that, which then put me into Stage 2. Stage 2 is about recruiting 45 athletes and a whole staff team. And obviously in rugby, the 45 athletes, it's also the player profile. So you've got to go from your props to your wingers. You've got to have players that are not just 45 players, but players that can play at the level. And also, you know, the women's game has just expanded so much, and the standard has gone through the roof because resource has been put around those athletes. So all the potential has now come flooding out. So they've got to be athletes that can play safely as well at that level.
So 45 athletes, how many members of staff?
I will have 5. I've got 5 coaching staff that will be directly involved with the team, two lead medics, 2 strength and conditioners, 2 analysts, team manager. So it's just building. It's a
massive team, isn't it? Team behind the team.
Huge.
And a great investment from Ealing Trailfinders.
Well, this is it. So I used to be director of rugby at Wasps, and for 5 years there I was the only full-time member of staff. I had wonderful staff around me, but they were sessional staff, so coming in. So when they're in, they need to be in front of players. So this is different now. I'll have the planning and the opportunity to really bounce ideas off of loads of other people, and I just can't wait.
Perfect guest then for this pod on coaching, isn't it?
There we go.
Full wealth of it.
There we go.
Okay, well, our next guest comes from the world of football, Willie Kirk. He was in charge of Hibernian Women when they won trophies in 2010 and 2011, and has worked in the Women's Super League with Bristol City, Everton, and now Leicester. In the season just finished, he oversaw a remarkable turnaround as Leicester recovered from having 0 points at Christmas to avoid relegation. Willie, I mean, I presume your phone is ringing, especially the men's team. Can I say that? They got relegated from the Premier League, but you worked your magic. How'd you go from 0 points at Christmas to staying up?
Yeah, I think it was just about making lots of little changes. Ended up making a big difference, and we had a big focus on like environment and culture, and we recruited really well in January, and it all seemed to fall into place, and it was a really positive second half of the season.
So what's your off-season now? Any big plans, any big signings on the horizon?
The off-season, yeah, is just recruitment. So we've finished that season on a positive. 12 have now left the club. And
that's a lot. So it is literally a big turnover.
It's a lot. We're looking to bring in 10 new players, or up to 10 players. So yeah, it's pretty much just recruitment before trying to get a holiday.
And where do those players come from? Is it international? Is it youth setup?
Yeah, it's a mix. We're trying to get a balance between players that are going to the World Cup and players that aren't, so we can get them in at the start of pre-season. Try to get a balance between experience and youth, and also the balance between players that already know the WSL and players that will be new to the WSL. So yeah, it's just there's a lot of spinning plates just now, and we just try to get a few over the line as quickly as possible.
And like Giselle said about the investment coming from the club, Leicester have invested quite heavily then to be able to make those moves to some big players, international players or players in the WSL who are looking to change teams, because ultimately they need to be paid well to perform well.
Yeah, definitely. It's huge investment from the club, and I don't know how much you know about it, but it's like the King Power group that own the men's club, and the King Power group own us. So we're not reliant on, obviously it was unfortunate the men got relegated, but it never affected us directly because like we're both owned by the same group, but the men don't own us, so to speak. So that's been a big commitment from the club, and I think that dates back to a few years ago when the women were gifted the men's old training ground. So we've got our own training ground, which I think makes a huge difference to what you can do with your players and staff, and that commitment from the club has continued, and they're very ambitious, and the Thai family that own King Power want us to try and replicate what the men did previously, you know, getting Champions League and competing for cups.
Yeah, getting trophies. Well, welcome, and we'll hear more from your experience later on. Last but not least is our third guest, Abby Johnson, a community cricket coach. She's been coaching since she was 14 years old at her local club, Louth, and also works part-time in the county setup with Lincolnshire. She's continued to coach alongside her studies. She is completing a master's in biomedical science and is also caring for her mother while she underwent cancer treatment. Hello, Abby.
Hello.
Thanks for coming in. First of all, how's your mum?
She's doing really well now, thank you.
Good.
Yeah, in remission, so
Awesome
all got
news.
the all clear. But yeah.
Fabulous. And also a master's in biomedical science. What's that entail? Takes up a lot of time, I bet.
It does. It's very intense, but I love it. I love science, always have done, and just love that degree. So.
And what is it you want to go on and do in that degree?
If I was to stick with the science route and not go with the sports route, I'd like to be a cancer genomicist, so a clinical scientist.
Amazing. And is that inspired by your mum's journey?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah. And I had a really good supervisor at my undergrad, so that was sort of her kind of thing as well. And I find it really interesting.
Incredible.
Yeah.
You're an incredible person. I'm clearly multi-talented. But if you were to get a career in sports, because with coaching you're so passionate about it, what would that be? What would it look like?
I'd always like to do the coaching, but I'd like to go sort of more down the sports development route, whether that's in cricket or other sport, because it's that if you can get it right at grassroots and providing the right opportunities for participation, you can really just builds up throughout the whole sort of setup. To having strong sides all the way through. So
well, you're in the thick of it now. In the thick of summer, cricket season. Are you busy? What are you currently up to?
I'm pretty busy, yeah. So obviously I'm working part-time, but we've got like 3 or 4 games a week at the moment with the girls, and it's a lot, but it's really good fun. So
what age groups?
Under 13s, 15s, 18s, and then we've had the women at the start of the season.
Right, but, so a proper mix then, isn't it, of experience, ages?
Yeah.
And
Our under 18s are really at the sort of peak of their game at this point, and obviously they've had exams, so we're going to look forward to them sort of the second half of the summer. But with the
stress-free.
Yeah, they should be able to play quite stress-free and be really free in their cricket. But the 13s, obviously, like we've only had them for one winter, and they're all very young, and it's just exciting for them. So.
Well, we're going to talk about coaching journeys just now. So continue that then, because you're talking about 13-year-olds there, but you started yours when you were 14.
Yeah. I mean,
so not a lot of people would say that. Tell us a bit about where it started.
It's just when I was at school, I'd just done my UK sports leaders, and one of the teachers was the cricket coach at the club, and I knew him already. He said, I'm doing a couple of nights after school with some like 5 or 6 year olds. Do you want to help out? I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, you had to do like your voluntary hours anyway, but I was like, yeah, that'd be great. And it's just started from there, really. I mean, just did that with the club, supporting the coaches for 4 years. I couldn't do my level 2 cricket qualification until I was 18. So as soon as I was 18, I did that. And then I was able to run sides by myself. And first side that I ran was an under 11 team. So I just got my coaching badge, and yeah, they were all like under 8s apart from one who was 10. And
how old were you when you were coaching that team?
So I was, just 18, yeah.
Right.
And had a whole season with them, and that was great. And that was sort of like the kick-off for there, like actually running a side and communicating with the parents. And I know it was only, community cricket, but that was a big part. But alongside that, I was supporting our women's team. So I was running that, coaching that, and just being a part of it. So
yeah. Did yours, Giselle? When you look at your CV, what you've achieved, who you've played for, I think you've probably experienced all different parts of the sport. Where did your coaching path start? Was it after your playing career, or
sort of
was it
through
intertwined?
it? So from the age of 9, I knew I wanted to be a PE teacher. So I took that route all the way through. I remember my father at one point said, no, I don't think you want to do that. As parents do. He said, I think you should go into law or be a barrister or something. So from 9 to 14, I went, all right, I'll be a PE teacher or a barrister. And then at 14, I turned to him, I said, can we stop this now? I'm going to be a PE teacher. So I went and did all of that. So then when I taught for about 14 years through my playing career, and then did the badges as you go through. So I'd already was level 3 qualified before I finished playing, and then that transition. So organising a session and doing things like that that's the bread and butter of it. Mm-hmm. But when I finished playing, I knew I still loved the sport. I love team sport. I love the dynamics of that many people interacting and trying to get the best from it. So around 2000, England development side needed a coach to take them to the Europeans. So they just looked at me and said, "Oh, can you do that?" I was like, "Oh my God."
Men's or women's?
Women's.
Women's, yeah.
I just had my first child. So at 8 months old he was, and my husband was going to America that week with his work, so I had to take the little one with me. And the head coach of England at the time said, "Have you ever taken a tour away like this?" I went, "No." He said, "Sit down, we need to have a chat." And thank God, his name was Jeff Richards, and he still mentors me now, to be fair. But he just, if he hadn't done that, I think it would have been catastrophic, I think. But he just sat down and said, right, this is what will happen here, this will happen there. And back in those days, we had 3 games in 9 days. So, I mean, rugby now, you think that, player welfare, etc., etc. But anyway, he sat me down and just explained what would happen where. And sure enough, I remember after the second game, we'd played it. Baby had woken up, fed him. It was 2:00 in the morning. He's in the rocker top. I've got my right foot on the rocker top doing that while I'm there. I'm analysing the game, so I've got to present at 9:00 in the morning to the players about what happened, doing all these things going on. And I just thought, if he hadn't warned me about this, this would have been stressful. But because I knew he'd said, this is what will happen and this is how it will happen. And he was absolutely right.
So do you think, had he not done that, you could have just gone, this is too much for me, I can't coach?
You just wouldn't have been prepared, would you? And I think when you know that something's going to be difficult, you have a different mindset to it. You're ready for it. You've prepared for it. And it's not a shock. I think shocks are where you can derail and react differently to how you should. But if you've kind of gone, right, so this is going to be a pressure point, this will be a pressure point, this will be, they don't become pressure points so much anymore. So he really prepared me for that. But I got back 10 days later, and obviously the 8-month-old, once the players had their breakfast, they'd take the baby and I would have mine. So he had 30 mums on tour.
So it was probably embraced then, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Because I can imagine even now it wouldn't be embraced.
It has moments. There are some that do and some that don't in sides. Later on in thing, when I had more kids, it wasn't. But at that time, it was fine. And but he got tour blues when we got back 10 days away. And he was like, where is everybody? Where is everyone? Yeah. But no, it was a fabulous experience. I loved it and thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. So
nice. So one of your main philosophies would be to be prepared, would you say?
Absolutely.
And know what you've got coming.
Absolutely. I've been coaching now years and years. I've never taken the field, whether I'm coaching the little ones, the big ones, whatever, without the preparation beforehand. Because the athletes, like some of obviously the game's now developed and the athletes now are remunerated, but early days they weren't, so they're giving up so much of their own time. Why would I not prepare for an athlete that turns up giving up so much of their time? They need something out of this. That's definitely one of them. But the other, I think that my core being with it is human being before athlete. And if you look after that side of things and you look after the person and you understand how that person is and how they function, then the rest of it follows after that. So all things come back to me for human being before athlete.
You're nodding away there, Willie.
Yeah, it's so important to get the best out of those. To get the best out of your athlete, you have to look after them as a human, and I think that's always been the case. Whether working at the very start with young lads who are trying to make pro contracts, or going into the women's game, where I've went from working with boys under 17s.
So is that where your coaching career started?
Yeah, I started
north of the border.
Yeah, north of the border. I started with Livingston in their boys' academy, 14s, 15s, 17s, and then went to Hibs, Hibernian.
Did you always know you wanted to be a coach? Because you were a player yourself, weren't you?
I just played semi-pro, and I don't know what it was. I always preferred playing Football Manager over FIFA. So I always preferred being in control of the team rather than playing in the team. So
that's where it started.
I think that's where the whole
on the gaming console
management coaching thing came from. And then I started doing my coaching badges when I was still playing, and I just really fortunate opportunity to go into Livingston. I was 29, I think, and one of my best mates' brothers were coaching, and he was an ex-pro player, so they got jobs quite easily in boys' academy. And it was a club, Livingston, small resources, and he said, "Would you fancy coming in and helping me one night a week?" And I went in, I said, "Well, if I'm going to do it, I'll do it properly. I'll come in both nights." And I just loved it. And then I combined both that and playing for 6 months, and then I wasn't enjoying playing, so I stopped playing at 29 and just went into coaching, and it just really started from there. And a few different age groups at the boys, and again, fortunate Livingston were skint. They had no money, no resource, and they were losing youth coaches. And within 6 months of coaching, I had my own team, because the 14s coach went to 15s, and I was given the 14s myself. So really fortunate, but learnt so much, and never actually realised how much I was learning at the time. Moved clubs to Hibs, boys 17s. So you've got, these 16.
When you say moved clubs, is that because you were approached because you were doing a good job, or?
Well, I must have been doing something. I must have been doing something right. But somebody asked me to go and work at Hibs, who were quite renowned for their youth development. Your Scott Browns, your Kevin Thompsons, your Stephen Whitakers had all come through, and I got asked to go there, and I jumped at it, and I went from working with like 18, 16-year-old boys to the women's team, where you had a 16-year-old girl and a 35-year-old woman. Yeah. And the learning behind that was just massive.
So what was, before you get to the coaching of the women, what was the point that you thought, I'm going to go and try the women's side of things?
My partner at the time was working away for the summer, so I had nothing to do. The boys stopped in May. I had nothing to do. And the women's season at the time was summer, so March to November. Right. Or no, they were doing a mini season. The boys' academy coach, who was the interim head coach of the women, I said to him, "Look, if you need any help, I've got nothing on during the summer, I'll go and help you." And I went to a training session, and it was horrendous. I was like, why have I said I would do this? It was terrible. Just the standard was terrible. The players' attitudes were terrible. On a Tuesday, they would turn up if they wanted to. A Thursday, they had to be there because it dictated team selection on a Sunday. I was like, what am I doing here? And then I stuck with it because I told him I would. And then he asked me to go to a game. He said, "Could you help out on Sunday for the actual game?" I was like, yeah, of course. And I went to the game, and it was completely different. Like, it was like I could not recognise these human beings. Really? Because it was just like they came to life.
They just wanted to play.
And what I realised was they could not find the correlation between training and playing. It was almost like, because the women's game in Scotland was very much recreational. Like, the players signed the players. So suddenly I understood it, and I got the training side of it. I'm like, right, well, we can actually help them a lot here if they can understand, like, performance improvement. So
not a lot of people would take that mindset. A lot of people go, they just can't be bothered training, I'm off.
Yeah, well,
stuck with it.
What happened was I continued for the rest of that mini season. The boys had started back, and then they asked me if I wanted to do it permanently. I was like, I don't think so, because I'm only like a couple of steps away from the men's first team here. So we played a cup final against Glasgow City, and we got beat, and I absolutely hated it. I detested getting beat in a cup final. And in boys' youth development, it wasn't about cup finals or league titles or anything. It was just about developing players, which I enjoyed, but I'd done it for 4 years. So losing that cup final was a catalyst for me to go into the women's game, because I thought, no, I will do this. And that was the start of it. And I dipped my toe back into the men's game for 6 months, about 5 years after that. And I've been in the women's game since.
I think we'll talk a little bit more in a bit about the difference between coaching men and women, because I can imagine that's a fascinating insight. But Giselle, you've just been nodding along there saying that they just wanted to play. Like they didn't want to train. So from your experience in coaching, how do you marry those two things together, where you get your players to perform as well as they're doing and matches?
Well, I think the whole, when you take on a new team, whatever level, whatever gender, it doesn't matter, whatever sport, it's about finding out first and foremost why everybody's there. Why have they joined this team? Why are they part of this team? Why do they want to play? And when you find out what that is, you then go in on that. So, for example, when I took on Teddington men's team, they were senior men's team playing about, this must have been level 8, 9 of the men's game. They just loved each other's company. That was what it was about. And you watched it and thought, okay, fine. So they also loved a good drink. That was part of being part of their company and what have you. But they were some pretty talented individuals in that. And I was like, they're just a complete shower of whatever all over the place. But if they have a little bit of this and a little bit of that, they also trained for body beautiful as opposed to sport. Does that make sense? They were young men who were anyway.
Well, like Willie, you've got, and I presume you in a minute, you've got to see that potential to take it on.
Yeah,
is that right?
So I did 2 guest sessions first because, and again, when I turned up female to the male, they'd never been coached by a female before. So I just said, I was rung up saying, would I consider it? And I first played, that was where I first found rugby, at that club. So I was like, okay, I said, right, I'll come down for 2, just tell them it's 2 guest sessions, because basically their coach had walked out on them in August. So I said, and I'll come and see whether I think I can make a difference or not. So I went down and did that. And
what was the reaction when you rocked up?
Okay, so...
And they saw a woman.
Yeah, so I can just remember it so clearly. There was one guy in the group who had stenciled across his forehead, what the do you know, right? So...
Actually...
Not literally, no, but that was his whole...
Oh my God, that's me just being so naive.
His whole attitude...
So his face, sorry.
Yeah, his whole attitude was, why am I in front of you? What am I doing here?
His face said it all.
That's it, yes. Right, okay. So...
I can't believe I just said that, actually.
So I was like, okay, fine, here we go. He challenged me on a question, so I answered it, and then we carried on. Then he challenged me again, so I upped the intensity, did...
The same fella?
Yeah, 3 times. After the 3rd time, he got on with the session, and then at the end of the session, he came up to me and said, that's the best session I've had in years. But initially...
Fair enough.
Yeah, exactly. So then I came down the 2nd week to go again, and the captain of the side had not been there the first week, but had then had all the boys, this is what happened. So came in, and he was the first to do something that wasn't right. So I immediately went, no, your team stops, blah, blah, go, because we're all competing and what have you. And he was like... And then his intensity went up. And then all good. And I turned to the guy afterwards and said, yeah, I can take him on. You can tell him I'm going to coach them. It's fine. I can see I can make a difference. And we trained Tuesdays, Thursdays. And then on a Friday, they'd all meet and they'd all have a beer. And I'd be like, boys, that's got to stop. I said, by all means, go out and enjoy each other's company, but you do your drinking on the Saturday. And there was this like, whoa, this is after 2 years.
Did you ever have anyone stand up to you and say, I'm not doing that?
No.
Or any resistance at all?
That was 2 years into me coaching them.
Well, on the say, for example, even your first week, did you ever have anyone say, I'm not doing that? What do you know about rugby? Or that type of feeling?
No.
Or did you feel that you had to change the way you held yourself or the language you used working with men? To gain, it's not to gain the respect, but, do you know what I mean?
I believe that athletes need to be challenged. They need to feel they're developing. They need intensity of session. They need a lot of fun. And that's at all levels. Be you the most elite Olympian to the grassroots. If they've got that and you know you're growing and developing and the reasons that you play the sport are being met, the whys, which is what the first thing, no. Because it's when one of those is missing that you start to get the challenge back. If you're not prepared, if you're not ready. So when something's missing and you get challenged, it's like, okay, I look at it and go, what's missing? What is it that I'm not doing in the last... It's never on a one-off session. One-off session, it's just someone who's in a bad mood. That's a different thing, and you don't overreact to that. But if it's a feeling that starts to develop, there's something missing. So you've got to work out what it is that's missing. But that drinking thing, and what actually happened was the boys would go out on Friday and they'd have a meal together, and they actually remembered what they said to each other. Because on a Saturday night, by the end of it, so what happened was they deepened their friendships. They deepened the lives that they had with each other because they were now out on a Friday. There was only one player who said, I'm really sorry, I'll have to have a couple because I just can't do it otherwise. But it was not
But it's different.
Yes.
And they changed that, and obviously the performance and the results
and they grew
spoke for
deeper
themselves.
as a group, and their reasons why. Those lads now are still so tight.
I bet that was nice sat in the stand.
It was an incredible feeling. Incredible.
Abby, I mean, when you were working with youngsters, a completely different demographic, obviously, and they're not going to be wanting to go down the pub on a Friday night. Hopefully not, anyway. How did you manage those dynamics? Because I can imagine from 13-year-olds all the way through to 18-year-olds, you've got different pressures from peer pressure, exams, hormones, puberty. What were the biggest challenges that you faced, and how did you manage them?
I mean, at like club stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a mixture of mostly boys, but there were some girls playing. It was always like I would never coach above under 13s, really. And they had respect for me because they liked me as a coach, liked me as a person. I never really came across any boys or girls being like, what, I never was challenged as why are you here? Mm-hmm. I got that respect because I don't think they cared. They just wanted to play cricket. They just wanted someone there to look after them, give them a challenge, and they were happy then if they were getting the right offer and you were giving them the right thing. But the biggest challenge with that would just be making sure that they had their pads on the right way and they had the helmet on, and have you got your hat? Where's your hat gone? And like stuff like that, making sure that they've got everything out the changing rooms. The amount of stuff I used to carry around in my boot after games because it's just kids' things, like, But in terms of county, it's only my second season with them, and the 13s, they're just like, again, it's still very much that, just happy to be here. Their cricket that they play is very developmental, and it's about making sure everyone has a fair opportunity.
But how do you get to that point where everybody likes you? Because it's human nature that, I mean, some people like you, some people don't, and that's okay because we're all different. But how do you get to the point where everyone loves you, everyone likes to be coached by you, everybody's listening? I
found at club level, it's just a case of, let them have fun, be easy with them. You don't need to be like a teacher. You just need to be like a facilitator, making sure that they're safe and they all have an equal opportunity, and you don't have any favourites, no obvious favourites. And whereas at county, it'd be interesting to know if actually all of the girls actually do like me. I don't think they dislike me, but I'm sure there's some that will prefer my other coaches to me. It's just about building those relationships and building that trust, I think.
And at what age do they split off into boys and girls, or is it all mixed, or is it all...
So at club it stays mixed really the whole way through, whereas obviously county, that is just straight up boys and girls.
And do you find it different coaching boys to girls? Do you take a different approach?
I'd say with girls you have to, I've had to listen to them a lot more and try and build that trust before we can start implementing the changes that we want. It's
almost
really
giving a reasoning why you're changing or doing things.
We were saying this before we started talking. It's like the context behind. I think girls need the context behind why they're doing something to actually understand it and go, okay, yeah, I'll back you with this and I'll go with it. Like, it takes a while. I think sort of the first half of the winter with the girls was a challenge, changing how we did things, and they had to sort of believe it and see it.
Right.
And
so what sort of resistance would you get then? Literally
just be like, don't know why I'm doing this, what is the point, honestly. and me and my head coach Martin were just like, we'd have loved this opportunity if we were at this age again. And they just didn't understand why we're doing things. They just wanted to like play games, and we're like, we need to build your skill sets up here. We need to do volume of skills, and then we'll get into more game situations. We're not going to be playing games because we're indoors, and coaching cricket indoors to outdoors is another challenge in itself.
Space.
It's really hard to coach cricket in that environment, and then you go outside and it's totally different. So, but after Christmas, we'd spent a lot of time with them, and I think they did start to see that when we went into those sort of match scenarios in the training, they could see that actually they had developed, and they started to then believe what we were saying.
Yeah. So they almost want an explanation of why they're going to do it, a roadmap, and then the destination.
Yeah.
Is that something you found, Willie, going from working with men to women?
I think so a little bit. I think as people now, we're more inquisitive. I think we want to know why we're doing things. I think the difference is where it sits on your list of priorities. So for the young lads, they did it because they got told to do it and because they thought this was the way they would get their professional contracts. They still probably wanted to know why eventually, whereas I think with the women, they want to know why before they even do it.
Mm-hmm.
They've got lots of questions. Yeah, they respect your knowledge, but they want to know that you care for them as a person and that you're trying to develop them. And you know, all athletes are the same. Going back to your point, they want to enjoy it, they want to work hard, they want to improve, and I think it doesn't matter if it's elite level or if it's grassroots level, if it's male or female. I think they want to feel as if they're improving and they want to enjoy it.
For a quarter of a century, MasterCard has ignited the spark for inclusivity and gender equality in sport. That's why, as a major sponsor of women's football, MasterCard proudly sponsors Arsenal Women. Arsenal Women are pioneers in football, paving the way as inspiring role models to help the next generation unleash their inner potential. Go to mastercard.co.uk to find out more. You're going to come across, I can imagine, as well. I mean, just like you were saying, 45 athletes. I don't know how many how many are in the squad for?
Between 23 and 25.
Yeah, so it's a lot of different people to juggle. I was in a squad 1 of 32 and we're all different. We all want to be managed different, told when we're selected, when we are selected, all different ways. How do you juggle then a group of women who, like you say, could be, you know, the youngest 16 to the oldest 35? Because they've all got different life experiences and you're one person. Do you remember each individual athlete? How do you even start there?
I think you've got to start off with your sort of non-negotiables for everybody. I think you've got to have your values that you always fall back onto. But I think you've got to treat them as individuals above that. So, you know, as long as you've got your guiding principles, I think you can, not for me, I don't believe in the one rule for one rule for all. Because everybody's got different circumstances. I could have a 21-year-old from Australia who needs a little bit extra time off or needs an extra couple of days at the end of an international break to see family because it's the first time they can see them in a year. Whereas that would be different for an English player who's 27 and I want them back in the building as quickly as possible. But family's still really, really important to all of us. So, yeah, I think as long as you've got your guiding principles, you can manage individuals slightly differently. I think the skill is and experience is about how you manage those individuals on a daily basis.
How do you find that, Giselle? I mean, again, going to individuals both from a women's perspective and a men's perspective. I know being part of our squad when things weren't going great. So, for example, in 2014, we weren't playing well as a squad. We did have that culture of, well, why are they having the day off to go to graduation? And actually, I decided not to go to graduation because I think that actually it's more important for me to be here. All these different values and different points of views. How do you marry them all together so that the culture, people realise they're all being treated fairly, even though they have different circumstances?
I think the golden nugget for me is communication. If you don't communicate, perception takes hold. Mm-hmm. That's the thing for me.
Everything in life, isn't it?
Exactly. So if I've given someone off the time to go to graduation and I haven't given the time off to go somewhere to this one, I have to be open and transparent as to the whys. Now, you might not agree with what the decision, but if you know this is why I did this and this is why I did that, because what happens, and I also think this is the difference between males and females, that the lads will be annoyed about it, but then they but then off it. Whereas from the girls' perspective, we'll hold it and hold it and hold it because emotion gets attached to it and it needs to be, we have a bigger picture view of everything. It's not so, it's just how our brains work. And a lot more emotion is involved with females around issues than there are with men. Again, just how the brain works and how the differences between how men and women think. So the perception piece, if I haven't explained that, then something else might happen to that particular athlete. Maybe they don't get even selected that week as well for some reason. The two, in my mind, not connected at all. It's just that's what's happened and this has happened. But in their mind, it's like, she doesn't like me. That's the first thing because I didn't communicate, right? So then it's, she doesn't like me. And then the next week, something else, I still haven't picked them, okay? So then they turn to their mate and say, told you she didn't like me. And the mate goes, yeah, you're probably right. Mm. And now they've got
a snowballing. Right.
And so now we've got little pockets going on. And all it came back to is I didn't explain why you were allowed to go to your graduation and you're not. So there's for me, the whole thing is around communication. I call it tick-tock, boom. And if you don't do it,
Yeah.
and you let the time go, it will explode. So it's a courageous conversation that has to be had sometimes. And if you have the courageous conversation right at the beginning, there isn't an issue because they might not agree, but they understand.
Honestly, that rings home to me. I was coached by Danny Kerry, who's the best coach I've ever been coached by. I know he tried to do his hand in the men's team, didn't go as well for him. But I literally had that same experience. In Glasgow 2014, in the final, in the run-up to this, Danny had never selected me. And I was like, he just doesn't like me, he doesn't want me part of his team until he left. Of course, then I got selected and I got my confidence back. I was playing great hockey. But he came back in as interim for that tournament. And there was 3 minutes left of the final. We were playing Australia, we were winning 1-0. I just heard his voice booming down from the stands because he used to sit in the stands. Karen Brown took me off, put someone else on. And I was like, there we go, he's back. Doesn't trust me, he hates me, he doesn't trust me for the last 3 minutes of the game. We conceded and ended up getting the silver medal and lost on penalties. So I was like, it was just stewing on me. Stewing, sat there. Anyway, it took me until like the back end of September after our 8-week break to finally have the conversation, which I probably would never have had. And I think that's why my relationship with Danny was always a little bit like weird, and he doesn't like me because I'd never confronted this perceived thought in my head. And I finally sat down with him. I went into his office and I said, Danny, listen, I know you've been gone away, but I can't waste another few years of my life. If you don't like me or you don't rate me or select me, just let me know, because I don't want to waste my time, your time, or a space for someone else. And he just sat there in silence, listened to me go off on a rant, and he went, Sam, he was like, I rate you as one of the best defenders on the team, if not in the world, one of the best ball winners in the world. In the final of the Commonwealth Games, there was a miscommunication between me and Karen over the radio because I wanted to actually keep you on and shuffle everyone and put Unzi on the back. So we had a back five for the last 3 minutes to keep it in. And I was like, mind blown. And since that conversation, me and him had a completely different
So there's the courageous conversation, but maybe that should have come from him early doors as well as the coach.
I mean, I know he won't mind me talking about this,
maybe early doors when that happened, whilst he would have been coping with the outcome of the game and all of the rest of it as well, to actually let you, so that 8 weeks didn't happen, and probably you did speak to other players as well and say, and everyone had an opinion about that moment. That as a coach, we need to share.
Yeah, because that for you is just like, oh, it was a miscommunication, it's happened, it's gone.
For you, it was your whole world. Yeah,
unbelievable. Because you start stewing, and I thought, okay, why is he not sat on our table for breakfast? Because I'm here.
And there you go.
But
and now you've got tick-tock, tick-tock,
and then
boom.
on the flip side, Danny's not sat on my table because he doesn't want to sit with me. So there was,
and you look for evidence, and you'll find
literally.
You will find evidence because your perception, you're looking for reality to your perception.
That was it. If he wasn't on the table, he didn't like me. If he was on the table, he wanted to keep an eye on me. Couldn't win. He couldn't win.
And then 8 weeks later, you have the courageous conversation, and and now all of that perception is blown away. Your reality switches. So when he doesn't sit on your table, you don't make it mean that anymore.
I mean, it must be exhausting from a coach's point of view to make sure that every athlete is looked after, because that little tiny thing
but here
on the
comes
pitch
the next
that's happened
bit,
is massive for an athlete.
But then the next bit with that, it isn't possible for me to be the one that connects with everybody. So this is where your coaching team and the diversity of a coaching team. And in men's sport, at the moment, they miss 50% of what's out there. I would be unbelievably naive and very arrogant if I thought that I'm the one that will connect with all 45 of my athletes. Yes, I want some connection with them, of course I do. But to be the one that matters, so for you it was Danny, it needed to be Danny for you. But it could have been another one that would have just sorted all that with you and said, no, that's not how it is. And you'd have been really... So we all relate to different people. So the value of your assistant coaches and how you build your coaching team then, at the higher level you go, and I know that from a community level it's often just you, but then you might not have 45 athletes who are so intense about the world, right?
Yeah.
So
it's true, that's
what it is. Because the more elite you go, the more intense it becomes. But your coaching team and how they relate, and not getting upset that they talk to another member of your staff, not you. Because so long as that member of staff holds the confidentiality but can let you know what's happening, it all works. So that's the next piece on it, that you don't have to be the one. Your ego must get put beside. So it's not about you, it's about, is your function and your environment working properly?
So from a community level then, Abby, how does that resonate with you? Any of those tough conversations? Or because I suppose even at like a county level, that's still, regardless of what level you're playing at, you want to be selected, and it still means that.
It's the first step to the girls having an opportunity of seeing that they could have a future in that sport at a professional level. And that's interesting. It's like in the girls' setup at Lynx, there's basically 4 of us that really lead that and are going to all the games. We've got, when you look at the calendar, you're looking at about 60 games in a season between 4 coaches. It's quite a lot. It's very full on, and only Martin is actually on the books. The rest of us are casual coaching, and we've got probably best part of 60 girls and women that we're managing between the 4 of us. So it's like a similar. It's intense in terms of trying to build those relationships. Like the squads are big. It's not all about one coach, being there for everyone. It's just about us. We, as a coaching team, sat down at the start of the season and had this is our messaging, this is how we want it to go. But we're all different, and it works really well. If there was two coaches that were exactly the same, you don't have that diversity, and you won't get all the players. So, on a game day, there's 12, 13 of them max, there's 2 or 3 coaches. We can then have conversations with probably all the girls, and anything that's stewing from that one game, it usually gets dealt with, and that's something that we've put in, that as Martin's come in and done that, and it has made it it's making a difference. You can see that
communication.
It's also, I think, important at that thing, as you say, they're looking at going on further and higher, that they start to learn about selection, because we don't get picked every time, and how we have to support the team when it isn't us that's doing. All of those lessons for that age group come from the community first off.
You know what? At that level, the girls are very understanding of it. When we're having these, especially with our 15s and our 18s, we have conversations with them, if they've just got out or they've come off on the field for 5 overs having a break, and they're very conscious of the fact that they might not get selected. And it's probably more the parents that we struggle with in terms of actually having those conversations. For 13s, it's developmental. For 15s and 18s, it's a national competition. We're trying to put out our best team because we want the girls. The girls need to see some wins. They've had a tough few years at Lynx. They've not had many wins, and they're really doing well now. And it's about, we can't just, it's not have a go cricket at 15s and 18s. It is an ECB recognised competition. We've got to pick our strongest.
It is so important, and I think sport's one of those things in life that still remains where actually there is selection. It's how you react, because it's life, isn't it? You're not going to get every job you go for. You're not going to get every boyfriend or girlfriend that you go for. You're always going to get knockbacks regardless of what it is, you know what I mean? And then it's how you react. I'm going to come back to Lydia Bedford, her appointment at under-18s in Brentford. Willie, one of the comments on the Telegraph website was that the teenagers that she'll be coaching will not respect her. From a male point of view, do you see any truth in that, or any worries in that, or how do you feel about that comment?
Well, I worked with Lydia Lester. I took over from Lydia. So I know Lydia fairly well. I know her skills as a coach, and I know her knowledge as a coach. And I think her approach, I don't think she'll have any issues with it. I think it will really suit her approach. I think working with under-18s in terms of those under-18s need to find their, I suppose, super strength. Like, one of them's going to make it, maybe 2 of them's going to make it. And I think Lydia is very big on her development and focusing on each individual and how they're going to become the best version of themselves. So I don't think she'll have any problems with that. And I think they've been very clever. They've almost put in 2 coaches there, 2 new coaches. With his name escapes me. I think he was at Forest Green. So he's coming in to work with Lydia. So I imagine the way Brentford work, they'll have done a lot of due diligence on the appointment, and they'll make sure that those coaches complement each other. Like we were saying, you need the whole coaching staff to be complementing each other. And those comments don't really.
Why do you think that age group? Do you think that's a really key age group in getting young boys, young men to then see the world in a greater picture almost? Because we talk about women in sport, women in work, just women in general, working in harmony with men, regardless of what the job is, what the role is. Do you think that's a really key age group then to start introducing gender parity?
Yeah, definitely. But I think over and above that, I think generations have changed now. So, I think what worked before, and there was so little diversity. A young 17-year-old male footballer looked the same, thought the same as any other 17-year-old footballer. I think the world is a completely different place now, and I think having a male and a female coach working together will be perfect for that group, who will be completely diverse themselves. And the world has just changed, and I think that's a good reflection of those changes.
Yeah, and I suppose the conversation's always, is there ever going to be a female manager in the Premier League? And I think we're probably still very far off that. But it's like you say, it's where you start making those moves. But I've got a few stats here, and I'm going to get just your general consensus and thoughts on them. So we talk about more women in sport and in different roles. Well, a Run Repeat report in 2021 found that while there were more female coaches than ever before, 72% of head coaches in women's football, so basically the top leagues in Europe and USA, as well as the top 25 ranked international teams, were male. So 72% of those roles were male. And in the USA's NWSL, only 1 out of the 10 teams were female coaches. And at the end of the recent season at the WSL, only 5 of the 12 coaches were women. So Emma Hayes at Chelsea, Carla Ward, Aston Villa, Kelly Chambers, Reading, Amy Merrick's Brighton, who is at interim, and Vicky Jepson, who's also interim at Tottenham. So that's down to 42%. And obviously we spoke about Lydia, the first female coach to be involved at a Premier League club. And that's at under 18s. What do we have to do?
Right, for me, now where we're at now, it's not the female coaches issue. It's those who employ the female coaches issue, all right? So it's giving us the opportunity, and it's that level now that needs to be brave and say they're good enough for the role. So I took the 16 to 18-year-old boys at London Irish who were looking for Premiership contracts, exactly the same similar type role that Lydia's doing with the boys. And the head of the academy at the time, Toby Booth, and Neil Hatley were the 2 that said, you're a teacher and you're a level 4 rugby coach. This job is made for you. They didn't care less that I was a female. I'd obviously been coaching in the environment with their academy boys going through from 13 on up to 18 already. So they'd seen it, and they didn't care less that I was a woman. And the boys and their parents and everything else were, okay, here we go. And we had an amazing time. I had to build the whole thing. I had to set it all up. Then I had to coach through. And I was there for about 8 years doing that. And several boys going on to contracts, whatever. Nobody had an issue with it. The boys never had an issue. So much so that there was one occasion where we were playing down in Devon, and Sky Sports were coming down to cover it because me being female and what have you, the amount of times that's happened, it's ridiculous. And I just explained to the boys the night before, I said, look, they're coming down to whatever because I'm a female coach. And one of the boys went, what? Female coach? We don't even see you as female. And then he went, oh my God, I don't mean that badly. Oh no, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, no, that's the ultimate compliment you can pay me. They didn't gender, it's people looking in that
Is
see
there an
female.
argument to be made? And I'm not saying that I agree with this argument. So people will say, well, actually the men's and women's game, regardless of what sport, are 2 different beasts. So if I put it in a hockey example, the female game is very much, there's a lot of passing. We do different presses to what maybe the men's team might do because physically we can't, run as fast or aren't as strong as the men. Whereas the men's game is very one-on-one, man-to-man marking, beat people for pace. Is there an argument to be made to say, actually, well, they're coaching in the women's game, which is completely different to the men's game. And we hear it in football punditry, what does she know about men's football? I quote, to women's football, it's a completely different game. Is there an argument there? And if there is, how do you get involved in the men's game from being involved in the women's game to that elite level? Is it a chicken and egg?
My answer to that is they're human beings and they're elite athletes, and you respond to what the athlete is in front. So from a female perspective, the amount of the first team players that would come and have a chat with me and tell me stuff about what their performance blocks were, but would never mention to the men's coaches because they felt that they would be perceived maybe as weak or not, mentally tough enough or what have you. But once they gave me permission to share them, we were able to sort those blocks out for those players, and then they start to perform on the field. So the diversity, and that's not pigeonholing in that women do that stuff. We're all different as coaches as well. So you can have a male coach with what people perceive as female characteristics and in their coaching, and likewise you can have a female coach that can be very male kind of characteristics that you might perceive. So we're all different, and athletes are all different. So I don't subscribe to that. You learn that kind of stuff about how things are, and it moves faster. The game moves a lot faster in the male area than it does in the female, but that doesn't mean that you can't coach it.
What about you, Willie? Because football it's the one, isn't it? In terms of people say football's king because the amount of participation, the amount of coverage it gets. Do you feel more pressure being in that sport to marry the 2 together, as in you being a male coach in a female surrounding?
It certainly never bothered me. I do think that now that we are getting closer to a generation of players who have being professional and full-time, you will get more female coaches falling out of that because they're better educated in the game, because they've spent more hours training, they've spent more hours playing, they've had more experiences with Euros and World Cups and Olympics. So I do think players nowadays, because of the experiences they're being exposed to, will have learnt more and will be able to transfer that across as a coach. So I think it's just been a little, in football anyway, I see it as being a little bit patient and just waiting for this next generation of players to see through their playing careers and become really good coaches. And like at one point we were 50-50 in the WSL, and then, in fact, no, I think at one point we were 8-4 female coaches to male coaches in the WSL at one point. And then there was a couple of changes and it went back to 6-6. It's down to 7-5 now, I think. So it's fluctuating all the time, and I think we've got to accept those fluctuations. And some of these decision makers are females.
Yeah.
So if females are not appointing females...
Yeah. There's issues there too. Yeah. Absolutely there are. But it is the people, it's not the level now. The coaching is ready. The coaches are ready.
Yeah.
They understand the games now. They've gone sport now. They've been involved in the sport for long enough. It is the people now who make those appointments that have got to be brave and take risks.
And I think it's about appointing the best person. I'm going through a process just now of bringing an assistant manager in, and I am fairly adamant I want a female. But that's not because I want to give a female an opportunity. It's because I want a female as part of my coaching staff.
Yeah.
And I've been reminded on a number of occasions, make sure you appoint the best assistant manager, not the best female assistant manager. I still think it's really important to have that, because I think you'll get that diversity, you'll get different skill sets, you'll get different opinions.
Which makes them the best appointment.
Yeah.
Because you need something that isn't currently there.
Yeah, definitely.
So it becomes the job spec. It's not about saying you're better than him or she's better than you, but for this job and what these athletes need, she is better for them.
Yeah,
and what
everything.
And what the staff need as well. I think that coach's room needs another woman.
So what's your current coaching setup look like then when you say it needs another woman?
So in terms of what I class as technical staff, the assistant manager has been a vacancy since I came in, and then I have first team coach who's male, technical coach male, goalkeeping coach male, and then I have 2 analysts, 1 male, 1 female. So that's why I think the balance is needed. I think we need a woman in that room to keep
cover more bases.
Check.
Yeah, cover more bases, isn't it? Like different.
Yeah, it is in terms of what the players. I think we always go back to players. What the players need.
100%.
Okay, so we touched a bit on rugby, done a bit on football. Do you foresee that changing in the future?
Yeah.
For example, yourself, I suppose, could
absolutely.
go up.
I mean, cricket, the ECB, they've had a massive shuffle around in terms of their priorities, and they're currently going through the Inspiring Generations. That's their big thing at the moment, and that's from 2020 to 25. And with that, there's a huge amount of grant funding for female coaches and ethnically diverse coaches. And so, like you said, be patient with it. It's going to come. There's that upskilling in that workforce and in that demographic is happening. And it's just patience. I think we will see more in the future, just not right now. And it also goes back to you've got to pick the best person for the job. And I believe that. And
do you think you have to see more females involved in managerial and coaching roles in the women's game before you start seeing more women in the men's game?
I'd say so. You've got to... It's one of those, I don't want to go like too far down a rabbit hole or anything here, but
you've down that rabbit hole.
You've got to like prove yourself. I feel like I've got to prove myself, and that's even just coaching females. I feel like I've got to prove myself. But then I'm really lucky where I am at Lynx. I've got 2 really good bosses who back me, and they're always willing to say, come and coach lads this week if you want. It's always there if you want to do that, and I feel like I will. I'm thinking this winter I'd like to see more of that.
What's held you back?
Just my own confidence, and I am only a young coach. Like, I've only been in the county setup. This is only my 2nd year, and I've obviously had a lot going on anyway, but I do want to, but I want to feel more confident in my ability. And it goes back to, like, I had volume last year of just literally learning how, working with that many different girls and actually understanding the sport a bit more, whereas this year it feels like that volume's come with a lot more learning, and I've had the right support above me who back me, and so I believe a bit more in myself. You've got to have, if you feel like you are being backed, whether you're a player or a coach, in your job by people above you, then you'll feel more confident in your ability. And I can see that they're going to have an impact on my confidence, let alone my ability. So
yeah, I mean, Giselle, I can see you nodding away. Any advice you'd give to a young upcoming coach?
Number one, to back yourself. And I think the question that you just said around, do we get in the women's game more coaching before the men's? Yes, because the opportunity's there. From my point of view, when you start out on your coaching journey, is to take as many opportunities as you can to immerse yourself in it and take that learning. And it's not about having to get it all right. It really, really isn't. In fact, we now know this, and everyone's more comfortable with this, that we actually learn way more from our failures than we do from our successes. The way you said, look, I'm only in my second year at doing this, that I massively subscribe to, is you can't run before you can walk, and you're so over that, in aware of all of that, and you're learning all the time. So now you've been offered the boys thing. Okay, yeah, I will. I'll rock up. I'll just come in. Don't make me do too much to start with, but I'm going to rock up. I'm going to watch it. Then you'll find yourself as a natural coach going in and chatting to someone because you've seen something, and then before you know it. And then the other thing is that communication piece. It's you can never do enough of that. It's people don't have to agree with you, but they have to know why you think the way you think. That would be my advice. And the be prepared bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything extra? You'd actually.
Never skip a conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And I've not nailed that yet, but I think that's really important. It's like that. There could have been a conversation 8 weeks before there was with you.
For 8 years.
Because sometimes it's uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable, but you put it off, it becomes even more uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think earlier than this, Sam, you said, is it not exhausting trying to accommodate every player? But if you don't communicate at the start, it becomes even more exhausting because you just create more problems for yourself. Yeah. So the uncomfortable conversation, and I think taking opportunities that will initially make you feel uncomfortable. So the boys, the first 5 minutes will be uncomfortable, and then you will go into coach mode, and it'll be fine. So I think that's been really important. Is you said learning from mistakes and admitting them, and sometimes admitting them to the room. We did that this season. I made a significant mistake at half time against Man City, and it wasn't until afterwards a couple of the staff went, I did think that at the time. I went, well, you've done yourself a disservice and me a disservice by not telling me. You've just went, he's the manager, I can't challenge him. So I think admitting mistakes, but sometimes you've got to build experience and confidence to actually admit your mistakes.
Yeah, I suppose then you're creating the culture then, aren't you, for others to follow.
And keep enjoying it, obviously. Keep enjoying
Good
it.
advice there. Okay, we're sadly running out of time, so last question, which is going to be a quick fire one to you all. What's the biggest coaching lesson that you've learnt?
You have to make sure the players enjoy it first, because ultimately it will make you enjoy it. If you focus on your own enjoyment first, there's no guarantee the players are actually enjoying it as well. So I think that would be mine. Make sure the players want to come to training, want to come to work, whatever it is.
It's probably similar for me. It's not that long ago that I was playing, and I had not some great experiences towards the end. And so I guess my motive for being a coach in that sense was I want the experiences for the girls currently to be better. They've got a cracking opportunity, and I want them to feel like they want to be there, and they feel like they're learning and they're enjoying it. And I think I've got probably more mistakes to make yet, and a lot of learning to do, but making sure that the girls want to be there and they're enjoying themselves is just, that comes above everything else for me.
Brilliant.
For me, it's about knowing myself and knowing my athletes. So I think when I have a reaction, when something happens, when that moment that you lost that final, you had a massive reaction and it meant you stayed in the women's game. When those reactions happen is to reflect on them and investigate them, because it's like, why do I feel this way? Why am I angry? Why did that athlete really freak me out when they did that? Why did I get happy about that? All of those things, so that you're really aware of yourself, so that when things are happening in the environment, you know the triggers that you're going to have, and then you manage them better. So, and then investing that time in knowing the same with my athletes. So when an athlete does something, it's like, yeah, that's just what that athlete does in these circumstances. Or conversely, that athlete never does that. What the heck is going on? So knowing yourself and knowing your athlete.
Oh, some brilliant advice there. Thank you so much for your time, for coming on. And all I can say is a big, 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 big thank you. You've been listening to the Telegraph Women's Sport Podcast with me, Sam Quirk. The producer is Shira Kilgallen, and the executive producers are Louisa Wells and Sarah Mockford. For more women's sport content from the Telegraph, head to telegraph.co.uk/women's-sport. MasterCard champions trailblazing women in sport and is proudly a patron of the AIG Women's Open, one of the most prestigious international majors in women's golf. Experience more of your passions with Priceless.com.